There we are. Welcome
Hi,
back. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good to have you back on the podcast, AC. So we were just talking a little bit about characters. We didn't get to it last time we spoke, but here in Xenogears, there's a pretty memorable cast of characters. Do you have a favorite? And if so, or if not, either way, I'm curious why.
Yeah, well, there are several characters that stand out, but I think Krelian has been my favorite for a while.
Cool. How come?
Um, well, I didn't like him originally, but then I just sort of, the more I replay the game, the more I sort of realized how he was sort of he's like this very sort of low ranking character, sort of just like a lamb. He wasn't born with a specific destiny, and yet he managed by his own intellect and power to really sort of figure out what's going on and even transcend to this higher dimension towards the end.
Yeah, I never actually got to the very end of this game when I played it like a decade ago or whenever like I don't know when I last played this game, but I didn't beat the game and I didn't beat the game the first time I played it either when it first came out. So I know that he is one of the final bosses, if not the final boss in the game.
No,
Um,
no, no.
but
He's not a boss at all.
oh
You
really?
never even fight. Or perhaps I'm spoiling this
No,
now.
no, please explain, explain. I thought he
You
was
never
one of the
actually
final bosses.
So you never actually beat the game.
Mm-mm. It was too hard
Uh,
for me as a kid.
well, I don't think I want to spoil it too much, but that's another thing I sort of liked the way he handled the character. He never, he gave the character some dignity by not just making some kind of boss fight with him.
Ah,
So
interesting.
he is sort of he is a bit remote perhaps. Some people have complained that because we don't really learn that much about him. But well, that's part of what makes him interesting. You really have to pick up on the subtle details uh,
Okay.
of the character
I, I
because
only no, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Well, I only just encountered him on this playthrough that I'm doing now. He appears in the game when you go to the sea area, Aquavi, and he's there as a kind of uh, in the background of the Ethos organization is when he first appears. And he's on that ship, right, that they call the Fishbowl,
Yeah,
that attacks the Thames. So he appears to be a an adversary, at least at the beginning here. Um, is that the first time his name appears in the game? Have I got that right,
yeah.
or do we know?
I think they mentioned him. They mentioned that he is on his way there, and then you first see him on board the bridge of that ship. That's correct. He is
Right.
the last. He is the last villain to be introduced.
Okay.
I don't think
Okay.
he's the last character to be introduced. You still get introduced to Ellie's parents. I'm thinking of the characters with facial portraits.
Right. Right.
Those I consider to be the main characters, so to speak.
That seems right to me, yeah. And some of them are playable, some are not, some are friends, some are foes. But that does seem like a good way to distinguish who's sort of the main storyline characters from who's just extra in there. I think Krellian is very interesting. I know his name at least comes from the Arthur C. Clarke book, Childhood's End.
Yeah,
Uh,
it was Takashi's favorite character
and so in
in
that
that
book,
book.
yeah, he's an extraterrestrial, hyper intelligent. He you never see him directly in the story, right? He's like very mysterious, and so I can see some elements of that at least about Krellion's character in Xenogears. What are some other elements that you can tell me without spoiling too much, since I haven't got to the end yet?
About Krelian.
Yeah.
Well, you should look out for how they portray him. Sometimes as how he sort of shifts his personality. Sometimes he appears to be this sort of mad mad scientist. And
Right.
other times he sort of he is quite calm and rational. And there's also very subtle references to him caring for human beings.
Okay.
So he has a part of his character is this sort of ruthlessness, and another part is that he supposedly cares for humanity, that he is trying to save them in his own way.
Okay. So a kind of tough love from Krelion. Well, okay.
Yes,
So
a bit like
the
that. Yeah,
the
he is sort of like a darker version of Karelen in the Childhood's End. They are both trying to, they are overseeing humanity, trying to. They don't believe that humanity will evolve on their own if left to their own devices.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So, but he's sort of like a darker version.
Yeah, that's okay. So, I mean, his association with the Wells or the Reapers certainly gives you that impression, and the whole sort of unmasking of what's going on in the Ethos organization is really pretty pretty awful, pretty horrible. Um,
Yeah,
but that part of the game is pretty much the extent of what I remember well about this game. Like I remember the story pretty well up until the events there in the Thames, and then down in Zeboim, the excavation of the nanotechnology colony that has the form of a girl with green hair. We
yeah,
learn more about her later. And then you climb what's called Babel Tower, and you arrive at the city of Shevat, one of the two floating cities.
yeah.
And
That's the midpoint, you could say.
yes, and that is the point. Like I say, where I have distinct memories of playing the game, certain moments from past that point, but I really don't remember the story very well once you get as far as Shivat. It all kind of becomes a blur at that point. So we'll probably just stick to things before that for this conversation, and then hopefully by the time I get to the end of the game, we can have another conversation and go over it properly. But yeah, so up until that midpoint, um, some of the memorable things that I think we wanted to touch on. You mentioned last time about Ellie's character and her color scheme actually having some significance, her and her gear. Um, and I know you wanted to say a little bit more about that, so maybe we could go back to Ellie for a little bit here. What do you think is significant about her character design and what it might refer to?
Well, she has this. Her hair is sort of the same color as a lion, and
Right.
her Omni-gear is called El Regulus or Regulus, and that's a prominent star in the constellation Leo.
Okay.
And this was not my discovery, but someone pointed out that within Gnosticism there is this sort of symbolism of this demiurge, which is sort of the lower god, that sort of resembles Deus in Xenogears. That's the parallel.
Ah,
And,
okay.
and this entity has the upper body, its upper body resembles a lion, and its lower body resembles a snake.
Cool.
And there is another character, another female character in the game that has whose symbolism is the snake.
Is Miang, right?
Yeah, right.
Yes. And they're kind of the counterparts to each other. Ellie and Miang, it seems like.
Yeah,
Um,
it's similar to Faye and Id or Faye and Graf.
oh yeah.
Both main characters have sort of a sort of dark doppelganger.
Yeah. And so Faye has this martial artist kind of quality to him. And he uses the same fighting techniques as Id and Graf, also Wise Man. Of course, there's a very complex character thing going on there. But Ellie and Miang, Miang never seems to attack you in battle. She only supports Ramses, who is her technically her commander, as she calls him. Um, but I'm pretty sure, I might be wrong, but I think that she is also one of the final bosses. Is that right?
Yeah, you
Okay.
could say that.
Okay, good. And her kind of snake symbolism, she is very subtle. She's very kind of conniving. She actually casts a kind of hypnotism over Ellie for part of the conflict there in the Thames chapters. So yeah, I could see her having that snake-like quality. Ellie's attacks are these kind of elemental. Um, they use different elements, but she also has, of course, the air rods, which are like her power that she can unleash, kind of in the way that later on Faye will unleash the id power from his gear.
Yeah,
Uh,
she goes a bit berserk with these drugs also.
yeah, right. The drive. Yeah, yeah. And so she has these kind of flashbacks to some horrible crime that she committed while she was on the drive uh, up in Solaris at some point. Um, yeah, so her as the kind of lion, Miang as the kind of serpent, um, together would make up the demiurge. Then is kind of the argument that uh,
Yeah,
you're making.
exactly. I'm not sure how famous this entity is. It's slightly obscure, and so I'm not even sure it's intentional. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's intentional.
Right. Right. There are a lot of definite references to religion and to more of the esoteric um, alchemy and Gnosticism and things of that sort as well. In terms of the uh, the way that that fits in with the story, I think that is part of what makes it so interesting and at times confusing to try to figure out here. But I guess there's a number of different elements that enter into um, this conversation about sort of what makes this story so interesting, so worth studying. And I know that's something that you have thought about quite a bit. You mentioned you're working on a new article um, to go with the ones that you already have on your website. Could you talk just a little bit about kind of where your thoughts are right now?
Yeah, it's a story analysis section or page. I'm not sure how if I'm going to split it up into several parts or just do one long. But it's yeah, I'm basically trying to re-understand the game from a more, I guess you could say, precise standpoint. I know that in recent interviews, Takahashi has said that he always wanted to create a world, and he as when he was younger, he felt very inferior, I guess, something like that. And he felt he has said that the character that most resembles him is Ramses.
Ah,
And I wondered about that. Like at first, I didn't think it made sense. Why would he identify with this sort of elitist character? But then I began to remember that oh yeah, he gets kicked around a lot, and he always have to struggle with being called garbage, and
right.
that might be why he identifies with him. Takahashi has also said that because of this sort of inferiority complex, because supposedly he grew up with a family that was very competitive. And he never liked that, or he always felt like he wanted to escape from that. But he says that nowadays, perhaps he's trying to create all these worlds and sort of be like the god of these worlds
Oh
to sort
yeah.
of compensate for that or something like that. And so he sort of said that he desires to create the entirety of a world. And I find that an interesting angle to pursue in terms of reanalyzing Xenogears. So I sort of got some new material to work with from the latest interviews that and I feel like I always struggle to identify what it was that sort of made Xenogears stand out from other games, even what makes it stand out from its sister series, Xenosaga.
Uh-huh.
And I really think it has a lot to do with this sort of dark, apocalyptic, dystopic 1984 Brave New World themes.
Gotcha. Yeah, so the two sides of that I'm seeing are sort of the psychological side, which might drive some of Takahashi's creativity, right? That sense of wanting to create a whole world, and to get to be sort of the demiurge, right? Or even the god of that world. And then the sort of social or sociological side of it too, where you have those elements of dystopia and of the Brave New World or the 1984, those kind of elements of politics, that are helping to make that world feel, yeah, dark, real, sort of a place where interesting stories would happen. Those two sides of that both seem very important there. Um, it's interesting how they sort of come together in a character like Ramses, right, who's from the other floating city, Solaris, right, which is sort of controlling everything behind the scenes. Um, I don't remember exactly how Ramses's story fits together. I know that, yeah, he does seem very concerned about Faye being in the way of him achieving his full potential. Um, he has his flashbacks, right, of battling against Id there in Elru. I don't remember where exactly that is, but I know that that must have been a really traumatic experience for Ramses. It seems like he dreams about it, right? It wakes him up from nightmares. But yeah, but he is a kind of almost a figure of not exactly comic relief, I wouldn't say, because he's there is a sort of pathetic quality to him, right? You sort of pity him, because he he wants so badly to be great and powerful. But
Right.
early, at least, Faye slash Id gets the better of them in all of their fights, at least early in the game.
Yeah, he starts out really confident, and people sort of admire him. Sort of, he is good with women, and he never hurts a woman. And that particular detail is pretty interesting if you watch what happens to him.
Okay. Yeah, and well, he's almost very arrogant at first. He treats his inferiors uh, without much concern. But as you say, the women around him do seem to always want to impress him, right? As you're met, the Elements girls, I think, are definitely comic relief. They're sort of silly, and as you're introduced to them, they each try to sort of prove themselves to the commander, right? And this has some interesting consequences. Dominia is probably the most serious of the four Elements girls, but even so, she becomes a bit of a figure of fun.
Yeah, she was from Elru too, I think.
Ah,
So,
okay.
so Ramses picked her up after her town or her city or her land. Perhaps it is. It's a bit difficult to sort of get the sense of scale. If there's something I sort of feel is a weakness of Xenogears is that they don't really go all the way with the potential of this planet, this world. It doesn't really feel. It feels a bit sort of scarce or empty
Yeah.
for such a large story. But on the other hand, the places you do visit does get a lot of detail. So Solaris, for example, is very detailed, and it really feels like a real society almost.
Yeah,
So I guess
absolutely.
that's the compromise. But you know, a lot of games back then were like that.
Yeah, I think there's a real um, difficulty of managing those two levels of scale. I think it's actually maybe a sort of an analogy to that aspect of the psychological and the social, the individual and the society. You see it in the same way with trying to get the right balance between giving a lot of detail in the places that you can explore, but then also giving you a lot of different places to be able to explore, right? And I think I'd agree that in terms of Xenogears world map, a lot of it is actually pretty empty. You don't meet you don't encounter a lot of towns or places to explore really in wide swaths of the game. It's just water or just empty terrain that you're kind of passing over.
Right.
Uh, but
Especially Aquavie.
yeah,
Aquavie is really, really empty. It's just the orphanage and the church and Babel Tower.
yeah, yeah. I had forgotten actually how fun the Aquavie chapters are. I really enjoy that part of the game. From when you crash land on the Goliath airship, and you have these interactions between Faye and Ellie on their little bit of wreckage,
Yeah.
and then meanwhile, Bart and everyone else is aboard the new submarine that he has just happened to discover, which is
Yeah,
just happens to be
that's a bit contrived.
yeah, it's absurd. I mean, it's exactly the same in every way to the other ship that got sunk, except it also can go underwater, so that's really convenient, right?
Yeah.
uh, but anyway, so some of those moments with Faye and Ellie, I think are some of the most touching in the game. At least up to this point, you have a few, really important interactions between them, like starting from when they first meet in the forest. They're alone together there, right? They have a conflict, and then Satan shows up and sort of smooths things over and sends Ellie on her way. They meet again during the battle that is supposed to bring Bart back to the throne, but ends up having this disaster where Id goes on a rampage. Um, but Faye there again gets to sort of try to convince Ellie to leave Solaris to come and fight alongside him for a good cause, and she can't do it yet. She's not willing to abandon her responsibilities. And then there's this turning point in the Kislev chapters, which I think everybody who plays this game is really happy to get out of Kislev finally. At
Yeah.
least that's been what I've sort of heard. But the moment when you do finish up Kislev is really striking. You have this night purge, right? And
Yeah, that's a really interesting part
yeah,
when Graf appears and protects Ellie and all that stuff, and also that dialogue they have, that exchange. I remember that very vividly. There's no music. There's just this sort of a flowing wind, and they have their gears are sort of just hanging around
right.
as they converse, and Ellie says something that is very, I think, I really liked the dialogue there where she says that Faye, even though, and this is it's very interesting because he has just gotten out of prison. I mean, he's been a prisoner, and yet she tells him that he is more free than her.
Exactly. Exactly. That's his problem is that he has nothing, right, to belong to, no place to belong. And she says that's exactly what makes him so free, right? He
Yeah,
he can't see it that way, but she can because she's the opposite in a way. She has this place, but she can't make her own decisions, or so, that's what she thinks, right? But he sort of shows her that she can, and she chooses at that point. She finally chooses to leave the Solaris, the Gebler way of trying to control things. She fights back right by pushing against the airship bomb, that's headed for the reactor. And yes, in that moment, Graf comes to the rescue. It's very unexpected. It's this kind of side of Graf that we haven't seen before. Also, um,
Yeah. And then when he
yes,
shows up on the Goliath before they are shot down, he also he attacks Faye and the other party member, but he doesn't touch Ellie, even if you have her as a party member in the fight.
yeah. Now that's she notices that she points that out in case the character or the player rather, in case you playing the game didn't notice that was going on. She
Ah,
makes a point of mentioning it, and is very sort of concerned about it and
right.
wonders what's going on.
I
Uh,
remember now. Now that you mention it, I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, but it is striking that Graf seems to have this soft spot for Ellie that I think becomes more important when we learn about Graf's origins later on. Um, he he sort of sets himself apart though by fighting against Gears without using his gear in that fight, um,
Yeah.
which is what we saw from Ramses's memories. That's what id does too, right? And Graf was there watching, and yeah, that I mean that just sort of like shows you how cool he he is, but also a little bit maybe uh, impractical, right? Because he does get knocked off the ship by Satan, and then he gets shot in the face by Hammer with the with the ship's guns. I love that part. It's so hilarious.
Yeah.
Uh, Hammer, man, he is definitely an interesting character. So I think we should talk a little bit about Kislev at least before we move on into the events in Aquavi more in depth. Kislev, like I said, is kind of less fun than other parts of the game. I don't know. Was that your experience?
Yeah, I can understand why. I mean, it's the sewers particularly, and the fact that I mean the gear battling is okay. It's a bit repetitive, but it's that
Yeah.
part is sort of fine. But it's you also have to have Rico with you, and he's sort of slow and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But otherwise, I don't think it's that bad.
No,
I mean,
I
now that I know what's going to happen, I can endure it much easier. But I guess the first time, I don't remember. I wasn't really that first frustrated with it. But yeah, I can see why it's not popular.
I think, yeah, I agree. It's partly it's a problem that I have with Rico's character, but also a problem I have with Hammer as well. He's pretty annoying to me. The way that he sort of inserts himself into everything. I think he's intended to be that way, to try to sort of get the player engaged in phase emotions to an extent or something like that. The sewers I found really frightening. I didn't like that part. It was too scary for me as a kid. Um, and it's very long, It's a pretty difficult dungeon up to that point. And the boss, right, Redrum,
Yeah,
is easily the hardest boss up till that point in the game. Um, but his story, I think, is a good one of kind of redeeming what's going on there. But Rico's kind of backstory, I never felt like was developed enough in a way. Um, like I didn't get the sense that he was as fully realized a character as Bart or Satan, much less Faye or Ellie. I just thought maybe his story was a little bit rushed there, and could have been sketched in a little bit more. Um,
yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
it's because then you learn a little bit about the church and its activities in Kislev, how they are sort of in this struggle with the Kaiser, but it's not really tied together that well for me with what you learn about the church, aka the ethos, down there in Aquavi, where that story of Billy's, I think, gets a lot more space. There's a lot more focus on Billy as sort of an important character. than you get with Go.
His father is one of the old elements,
Yes.
along with Sigurd and Huga, which is Citan.
Yes, those I think that is part of it, right? Billy has his sister, he has his father, he has the orphanage, and of course the bishop that he looks up to, who turns out to betray him, right? There's a lot of things about Billy that help to round him out as a character. And
Yeah.
Rico is just really, he doesn't have anything like that. He has nothing really. I just felt like that was kind of a shame that we don't get to see more from his story. But
If I remember correctly, I think this is said in the book. I'm not sure if this is really comes across in the game, but when he was small, the ethos, basically, it was the church that turned him into a mutant
oh
in order to get back at the Kaiser, because the Kaiser was at odds with the church.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
no, I remember there's these flashbacks that you see from Rico, and about how he notices that he's starting to change right into a
right.
mutant. Um, he's alone because his mother has run away from the Kaiser at that point. But it's not really explained why he has turned that way. At least not yet in the story. I don't remember.
I mean, the way the story is told, it's like it just seems like certain people turn into a mutants.
Yeah.
It's sort of like random, like some people become dwarfs in real life.
It's just sort of an accepted part of the world that there's these
Yeah,
people
but I'm
who
not sure that was intended, because I think the whole idea was the reason why some people become mutants is because of experimentation by Solaris. So I think that nobody really turns into that by accident.
right, right. That I think that point you mentioned about the way the story is told, um, that's something that I find very interesting. As much as I like the content of the story, and trying to figure out sort of what's the truth, what's the real story here. I also really like the way that the story is told, which leaves these kinds of spaces for you to do that interpretation. And of course, the way the story is told is primarily through the game, right? Like you're playing, you're exploring. You can talk to all these characters and get a lot of dialogue, but you really don't have to. I mean, you can still enjoy playing the game just on the basis of stuff between the main, the main characters. If you just pay attention to that, you get the main story. But but of course, if you go around and talk to everybody and really explore, then you get that sense of the world. Like you're talking about, that seems to be the creator's goal, is to give you this feeling of a whole world, a whole universe. And I think it's really remarkable for all the weaknesses the game might have. That mode of storytelling is just really powerful in this game. I wonder if that is something that you know the creator was was intentionally sort of drawn to about video games as a storytelling medium. I don't know if that's something he brings up at all in those interviews.
No, I'm not sure that he entered the video game industry with the intention of making stories.
Hmm.
That's not the impression I have got, but it seems that he did sort of, after working on three Final Fantasy games, he did want to create his own world.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, if he really, how long he had that desire. It might have sprung up during his work on video games. But
Yeah.
I think that, but you're right. There are very interesting dialogue just from the NPCs.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the some of the ways that takes place, again on the Thames or the Thames, I go back and forth on pronouncing that like the British way or just the way that it looks on the screen. But anyway, as you're exploring this other giant ship floating on the sea instead of in the air, you run into all these really strange people. They're sort of people who are there trading and doing business, people who are there salvaging treasures from the bottom of the sea, but also there's sort of there's characters who are just looking out the windows, which I love. You know, they're sort of just looking out and kind of contemplating things, thinking about those floating cities that they can see in the sky, or thinking about Babel Tower,
Ah,
this tower that's so tall that he can't see the
yeah.
top of it. You know,
It's been a while since I played through Xenogears. I don't remember exactly how they staged the NPCs and such. I do remember that there was this guy sitting in the elevator, sort of drunk or passed out.
yeah, yeah, because you have to, for whatever reason, the way the elevator works is by spinning around like a
Yeah,
spiral, right? And so there's this drunk, yeah, who's sitting there and he says, "Please don't spin it, please don't spin it." And then of course you have to spin it to go anywhere. It has to spin, and so then he cries out as you go. He cries out in pain. Gosh, it's so hilarious.
of course, not
Um,
everything. Of course, not everything was written by Takahashi.
right.
They had several sort of event planners who sort of wrote minor characters.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Also aboard the ship there, you might remember there's the mini game with the cards where you play cards by running back and forth across the
Right.
cards and
And
clicking.
Big Joe is there and plays with you
Yes,
somewhere, I think. I mean, you come across him at each new city or a country you arrive at.
yes, and he is one of my favorite characters. I think Big Joe, the Wanderer. He's sort of your alter ego in a way, right? Because he's just kind of this free spirit,
Yeah.
having his own adventure, apparently while you're having to.
I think he's the major comic relief in the game.
Yes, yes, he's got the inside information like Hammer, but he's not annoying in the same way, to me at least,
So,
as Hammer is. Um, yeah, and Big Joe, I mean, he's got a really great piece of equipment that you win if you beat him at cards. Um,
I don't recall that part.
yeah, you get a key item, or not a key item, but you know, like a useful piece of equipment from each of the people that you beat at cards. And so one of them is like some shoes that make you go a lot faster in battle. One has something that helps you evade attacks. The Queenie gives you the Death Blower level 1, right? So you can use a lot less fuel and deal a lot more damage with your Death Blow. But then Big Joe has got the long dark coat, and
uh,
it boosts your attack and I think your ether defense or something like that. But it's pretty rad.
so, so he's the last one in that
Yes,
card game. Okay.
yes, and he's kind of hiding up on top of the submarine, so he's kind of hard to find. Yeah, he's sort of like provides these side quests, but also like he's a sort of a poet. You know, he's got a way with words.
Yeah.
He talks about you know um, exploring that one alleyway in Kislev, and you can find a music a jukebox disc back there, but not the first time you look, right? He swindles you, and then you
Yeah.
realize that he does have something back there that you can find later. Yeah, I find that so amusing, but also like there's a kind of a depth to it, much like that character in the pub back in Lahan, right? There's these kind of secrets that are hiding in plain sight throughout the game, which I love. Um,
Yeah.
Now, so we mentioned Big Joe. You save him from the basement of the Ethos headquarters also, but down there
Uh,
you get this kind of long revelation of what Solaris and the Ethos are really up to. That part of the game, if the stuff about Rico is like too short, you don't get enough about him. I felt like the part there in the Ethos headquarters, you get a little too much information there for my liking. It really washes over you at that point in the game. Uh, and I thought maybe it could have been shortened a little bit and like spread out over a few other events perhaps. But anyway, this is where sort of the um, the truth starts to emerge. Um, what did you think about that point in the story where you learn what the ethos is really up to?
Well, you mean the first time?
Yeah, yeah, what quote
I'm not
unquote
sure I
really
can.
up
I'm
to.
not sure I can recall exactly, but I did. I was into the story, and I really found this. But I guess in some sense it was sort of expected that the church would be sort of connected with Solaris. I don't think that I sort of was surprised at that. But I did sort of like that it did feel like the plot was moving, and I do think that there needed to be something like that there because there's a lot of people who feel that Xenogears didn't really grab them until Solaris, for example.
Mm,
And so to me, I was pretty hooked
yeah,
early on. I mean, I didn't really have that high expectations either. You know, I was pretty new to RPGs, but so I guess in some sense I was sort of easy to please at that point. But for those people who may have been more jaded and sort of used to RPGs, they may have needed something that sort of gave you some sense of where the story was going and what the central conflict was and things like that. Because Solaris was still sort of secret or hidden at that point. We do know about the name, but I cannot recall exactly when. I guess Sigurd told some story about Solaris before they tried to take back the throne.
yes, yes,
Right. I remember this sort of music. Yeah, I think it's called the Jaws of Ice or something like that.
right,
And they
yes, it's
sort of
very
and they pan around the sky and you don't see anything like oh it's hidden in the sky. So
exactly.
yeah, they did manage to build up Solaris to be this sort of really scary place. That's what I remember from my first time. The first time I was going to go there, I thought, oh, wow, you know, the game really felt long, and it felt like this could almost be like the last episode of the first season of a television show or something.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
yet I'm still on the first disc, and I'm going to this really scary place where people have been talking about where people get brainwashed and turned into mutants and things like that. So that was
Yeah, that seems right. Yeah, like the sort of the arc of the story is tending towards Solaris being kind of this big bad place. Um, but I guess I feel like the way that that is telegraphed to you, it's communicated to you really, really overtly down there in the Ethos headquarters.
Right,
Um,
but what I thought was pretty interesting and what I was intrigued by, or what I liked about that scene when this is revealed, is not so much that the church is connected with Solaris, but that the church is also trying to break away from Solaris,
mm,
that they are sort of engaged in internal conflict, and that's why they send all these sort of assassins to purge
yeah,
the church.
that's right. No, that is a good point. That those two things sort of come out back to back there, and you almost learn about the wells at that point, but not quite. Um, and and so yeah, there is a sort of way that revelation gets spread out a little bit more, and and so then you spend a while chasing Bishop Stone, whose real name is Stein, of course, and you follow him to the dig site, right? That's where um, I felt like the game really began to feel epic. Was when you
Right.
you you go down and down and down, and
Yeah.
you come to that sort of that background that you can
That
see this
bridge,
whole
that
city.
bridge. Yeah,
Yeah,
I really like that part. And also when Ellie starts getting these sort of memories and she talks like she's been there. That was,
yeah,
I was really intrigued by that the first time.
yeah. Exactly. I think. that is kind of what hooked me to the game, though, was the characters. You know, Faye and Satan and Ellie. The characters really drew me in, but the sort of scale of that story um, really begins to take shape there. I think when you think about the time scale of 4,000 years, right, which
Yeah,
is much greater than anything we've heard about up till that point, but also sort of the way that's just one building, right, of this whole huge city that you can see down there, that you explore, you know, for an hour at least, trying to get to the bottom of it. And then uh, down there, you have, yeah, that flashback of Ellie and Faye in the chamber. Um, she she can't seem to really confront the truth of what she's remembering at that point, or she doesn't have access to it yet. Um, but that does seem like um, setting up sort of the next pretty long arc of the story, which is to do with, you know, what human beings really are, right? This nano machine with the Wells, the Reapers, and Solaris's role in that, and also just you know, the nature of Faye's and Ellie's memories, right? We sort of kind of we delve into those a bit more in the second half of the story. Um, but yeah, but with Shavat at the top of Babel Tower, do you remember much about that area, like exploring it and talking to people up there?
yeah. How far did you get?
That's right where I am at this point. Is I'm in Shevat. I haven't yet gone to the palace, but I'm
Uh,
just in the old capital city, running around talking to everybody. That is one of my favorite parts of the game. It's so sort of tranquil, but also you get this incredible sense of history there too, right? That
yeah,
yeah
there's a lot of interesting things if you talk to all the NPCs.
yeah
And yeah, you learn a lot about especially the war 500 years ago. And that is sort of the midpoint, this where up until this point it has sort of been sort of like the characters have been reacting
hmm
to things happening to them, and now that they have these allies with the Shevat, they start to take proactive action much more.
yes
And I think that you get access to they remove a limiter in
yeah.
at the end of Shevat, and then you get access to more death blows.
Which is exciting, right? I mean, to
Uh,
feel the power of having one more action point that
and
you can
I think
access.
it is those death blows that you can get when you use them in your gears. You get to infinity
Right, right.
levels.
Yeah, and so we're at that point where we're going to start hunting down anima relics and getting omni gears. Yeah, all of the kind of the the scale of your power up to this point in the game is about to be completely shifted. Now, I have a question. When you played this game, did you know the trick about going back to Nissan to purchase the ether doubler? Did you do that when you played?
I did that once on one of my later playthroughs.
Yeah.
I played the game quite a few times, probably 9 or 10 times at least over the years. I think the last time I played it was in 2012 or something like that, or even further back, but maybe even before 2010. But before that, I had played it, but not the first time I played it. I did not know about that.
I know. Yeah. See, I never did this before, but it makes the game way easier. Like once you equip that, it makes Babel Tower way easier. It makes fighting bosses way easier. Um, it's almost yeah, it's almost like cheating though. I feel like if you it's so well hidden, right? Like you again, it's one of these things you can see it there in Nissan. It's in the shop. It just costs so much money that you know probably can't afford it at that point. But if you go back, once you have the submarine at your disposal, it's very affordable for what you're getting. It's super worth it. It saves a ton of time in the long run. But yeah, it just reduces the challenge quite a bit. Yeah, I'm sort of two minds about it. I'm not sure whether I like it or not, but I'm definitely using it this time.
Did you have a lot of a challenge the first time?
Oh man, yeah. See, like I said, I couldn't even beat the game. It got too hard for me at the end,
Right.
and
How
I
about in
quit.
the beginning? How long did it take you to learn to upgrade your gears, like the engine, things like
Oh
that?
my gosh. Yeah, see, I didn't really understand like anything that was going on with engine output
Right.
or like all I could tell was like HP and fuel are really good. So I went for those, but engine output is so much more useful, right? Like the power of your attacks, response, right? To go fast and evade attacks is so useful. These are things that they really aren't explained that well in the game. So
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
it took me, I was at Kislev when Ellie and her unit attacks you, and you are Faye, and you have to fight them one on one.
Right.
Even up to that point, I thought something is strange with this game because I just can't. I can't defeat these guys. It's really hard. I mean, I had even defeated the first time. It's really hard if you don't know how to upgrade. So I was quite surprised in retrospect how far I was able to go without ever upgrading any of my gears. But then I sort of figured out that there must be something with this because this seems strange that it's this hard
Yeah.
and then once I figured it out, I defeated them very easily. So that was, I think that was the trickiest part. There are a few bosses towards the end on the second disc that are quite hard as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I even had at one point I had the strategy guide to this game, like the official strategy guide. And I'd still like it just became too difficult towards the end of the game. I wonder if part of me also just didn't want to finish the game, like I didn't want it to stop, you know? And so I quit at a point where I was like I had put in, 60 or 70 hours. I was at the last dungeon, but I just couldn't bring myself to to find the end. But I'm determined this time. I'm definitely gonna get through to the end of the game. So I'll finally see what happens and see the truth behind the revelations that we get in Ethos headquarters. So, uh, all right. Well, I should let you go here, AC. Were there other topics from the first half of the game you wanted to make sure we touched on here?
well, there's one thing that I am personally very interested in, or which I have become very that it changed my view of the game a lot since the first time I played it. But it is this. It's very subtle in the game, and it is partly lost because of the translation error. But at the beginning of the game, when the Emperor and Citan talks about the time of the Gospel,
Oh yeah.
in the English version they say that he says that is our final prayer. But in the original Japanese, he says, if that does not happen. And then Citan contemplates, if that doesn't happen, then are we doomed or something like that. And
Hmm.
basically, there is a time limit. There is some sort of time limit that Deus absolutely needs to be resurrected before 10,000 years has passed. And so that's one of these details that sort of got lost slightly partly in the translation, but I also think that it was very obscure even in the original Japanese. Yeah. And this is not something that is actually explained in the game, which is why I'm mentioning it. But keep that in mind when you see all these conversations between the ministry and Kane and Krellian and all of this. They
Okay.
talk. It comes up later. They talk about, oh, you're starting to feel the pressure and things like that. There is something going on there, and well, there are hints, and of course, it is sort of revealed in Xenosaga.
Okay.
But
Yes, I I'm very curious to see what the stuff the Ministry and Kane are talking about is all about, because I totally do not remember. They throw out so many bizarre terms, like time of the gospel, which clearly means something, but it's not clear what.
right,
Yeah. Okay, yeah. And then yeah, with Xenosaga, that like I said, I played the first episode, but never played the rest. I really need to go back and replay those at some point.
they can be slightly painful to get through.
Yeah.
I mean, they are even more of a mess than Xenogears.
But it's a beautiful mess, is what I like to call it. I think so. I appreciate it again, AC. We will talk again at least one more time,
Yeah,
before the end here.
sure.
Before 10,000 years have passed. Okay.
Before the time of the gospel.
Before the time. Yes. All right. Take it easy. Thanks again.